श्रीशैलेशदयापात्रम् धीभक्त्यादिगुणार्णवम् यतीन्द्रप्रवणम् वन्दे रम्यजामातरम् मुनिम् लक्ष्मीनाथसमारम्भाम् नाथयामुनमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्ताम् वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम् यो नित्यम् अच्युतपदाम्बुजयुग्मरुक्मव्यामोहतस्तदितराणि तृणाय मेने अस्मद्गुरोर्भगवतोऽस्य दयैकसिन्धोः रामानुजस्य चरणौ शरणम् प्रपद्ये लोकाचार्याय गुरवे कृष्णपादस्य सूनवे संसारभोगिसन्दष्टजीवजीवातवे नमः।
Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. I start by offering my respects to all my teachers. Today we're on the last part of Artha Pancakam. Artha Pancakam, again by Pillai Lokacharya, one of his 18 rahasyas or books of esoteric knowledge concerning the 3 secret mantras. And up until now, we have dealt with, there are 5 sections of the book. So we've dealt with the first 4, and now we're going to look at the last section, which is called Virodhi Swarupa, or the principle of the obstacles to the goal. The goal being liberation from this material world, which means eternal service to the Supreme Lord in Sri Vaikuntham. Okay, so this is part 5. Virodhi Swarupa, or the anti or hostile principle. We can call it an obstacle. The obstacles to reaching the goal. This truth or principle is subsumable under 5 categories. Number 1, anti-soul, the Swarupa Virodhi. So an obstacle to realization of the self. Paratva, number 2, Paratva Virodhi, an obstacle to the understanding of God. Number 3, Purushartha Virodhi, obstacle of taking to the wrong goal or accepting the wrong goal or the wrong means, right? The wrong goal, excuse me. And the 4th one, Upaya Virodhi, adopting the wrong means, and Prapti Virodhi, right? Which is here called anti-gain, or the wrong gain or the wrong method of gain, the wrong goal, let's say. Okay, so let's see. Swarupa Virodhi, let's understand that. The first one is Swarupa Virodhi, or anti-soul, or what is hostile to the soul of the nature, or the soul nature. Is the soul identifying itself or its nature with the body? So here we have a couple of footnotes here. I think the first footnote we already dealt with in the previous section. We'll just read it again. And I think, no, that was about henotheism, correct. Okay. So here we have the second footnote. So this is about the soul identifying itself or its nature with the body. So student of the Bhagavad Gita may read the whole of chapter 13, a sequel, as it were, to chapter 2. As we all know, anybody who's read the Bhagavad Gita will know that in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter is about setting the scene, and the scene is on a battlefield, a conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna as teacher and student. And Arjuna is being instructed by Lord Krishna. First, the instructions start off in the second chapter, speaking about the difference between the soul and the body. And so he's saying here, you can also, so you read the second chapter, but also read the 13th chapter. So discoursing on the knowledge, discriminatory between body, Kshetra, and soul, Kshetrin. Particularly the concluding verse, number 35 of the 13th chapter. Chetra gayor evam antaram jnana chakshusha bhuta prakriti moksham cha ye vidur yanti te param. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes they use this word chetra. The word chetra literally means a field or a place. And chetra gyayor means the knower of the place. So the soul is the soul, because the soul's consciousness, the soul is consciousness, and its consciousness pervades up to a certain limit in this material world. The limit is the body. So the soul's consciousness pervades up to the limit of the body. We're able to feel things that occur to our body. So, okay, so that's just the footnote. Let's go back and continue on. So when this nescience or ignorance, right, meaning the misidentification of the soul with the body, so to say, has vanished, then comes the profession of allegiance, sheshatva. Sheshatva means servitorship, to deities other than the one God. Okay, so what he's saying is, the first thing is, people who are extremely ignorant or extremely covered in their knowledge, right? Extremely mired in nescience, which is the opposite of knowledge, ajnana, as opposed to jnana or knowledge, the opposite. They are associating the body with the soul with the body, and they're misidentifying the soul with the body. One step up from that is thinking that one is a servant, but not a servant of God, a servant of some other person, a servant of some other deity, some greater power. And this could be a devata, the devatas, or other different gods, or it could also be, powerful human beings like the king or the president of the country, or the leader in our group, or the leader in our family, or different leaders, other than being the servant of the one supreme God, Sriman Narayana. Okay, so this is one step up. So, but when this error too has disappeared, what may again supervene is the false idea of the soul's independence, right? So we spoke about the person who is just interested in isolation and kaivalya, who's interested in their own realization of the soul, and doesn't think about God, doesn't think about an active relationship of service to God, Sriman Narayana, but simply thinks about one's own soul's independence. That's one step up from thinking oneself as a servant of all these other leaders, as if it, the soul entity, were not dependent for its very beingness, for its existence, right? Not to speak of its activities and final doom on a cosmic entity that is God, Bhagavan. Okay, so that these are different levels. First level is complete nescience, thinking the soul to be the body or the body to be the soul. Second is to think that there is a leader or somebody to serve who is greater than us, but not realizing that it is the one Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana, thinking that others are our leaders. And the third thing would be to think that the soul is completely independent of God. And this is what we call ahankara or mamakara. Minus and minus to the fullest extent, we're completely independent. Whereas God is really the only person who's independent, fully independent. Everybody else is dependent. In Sanskrit, those words are swatantra. The Supreme Lord Sriman Narayana is swatantra. He is completely independent. Everybody else, every other being and every other thing every other conscious and unconscious entity is dependent upon him. But that is, in Sanskrit, paratantra. So, the second thing is paratra virodi, or anti-God principle, or what is hostile to God, is the misnotation that lesser gods, and we have a footnote here, possess the character of the Supreme, right? Thinking that there are other deities, either living in this material world, like the leaders that were talked about in the first part, different leaders like the head of the family, the head of the country, the head of a business, the head of whatever group, right? Or the different devatas in heaven, right? That thinking, misidentifying and thinking that they possess the character of the supreme leader, the supreme person, Srimanarayana, or mistaking of non-supreme deities or gods for the one God. And that God here, obviously, we would usually put that in lowercase G-O-D. There are lowercase gods, and then there's the supreme God, the one God, Srimanarayana, supreme. Or believing them to be of equal status to God. So either that they are greater or of equal status to God, There are no, okay, this is the real meaning of God. The real meaning of the word God is that there's no being or thing which is greater than him, neither equal to him, nor equal to him. So, therefore, we can say also the Tengalai Southern School of Sri Vaishnavism does not accept Mahalakshmi or Sri Devi to be equal to the Supreme Lord, Srimanarayana. So, whereas the Vadagalais, they see the one Supreme God as a dual entity, the Divya Dampatis, the divine couple. Of course, the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas also accept the divine couple, but in the divine couple, one is God and one is not God. Okay, so believing them to be of equal status with God, the investing of minor deities with power that can only belong to the Supreme. So if we think that some minor deity has a power that can only belong to the Supreme, like being able to pervade by his Swarupa everything, being able to create universes, being able to give moksha, if we think some other entity can do that, right, then that is also a mistake. And mistaking of God incarnate. We talked about the different 5 forms of God: Paravyuha, Vibhava, Antayama, and Archa. Right? So we have the Vibhava incarnations, the different Leela avatars of God, like Matsyakuma Varaha, but here he's mentioned Rama and Krishna, Rama, Krishna, etc., as human. So thinking that those incarnations of God or avatars are ordinary human beings, thinking that Rama or Krishna are ordinary human beings, and thinking that the images of God, meaning the deities of God in the house shrine or the temple, right, are inert and powerless, right? These are all anti-God principles. These are all mistakes that we make in not recognizing who is the actual Supreme Lord and in what variety he appears. So, principle number 3, the Purushartha Virodi, the anti-goal, or what is hostile to the ultimate aim. It is the desire for fruits or ends other than that of God himself. Right, so then there are different types of fruits that one can desire, right? And others being those noted under Purushartha Swarupa. So we can look at Purushartha Swarupa, that section. We can also see what those goals which are not the Supreme, because the goal is the Supreme Lord. The goal is service unto the Supreme Lord, and therefore any other goal is against that. And the idea of deriving self-gratification or of gaining satisfaction for oneself in the doing of divine service. So even above that, above and beyond thinking that there are other fruits, then first of all, other fruits in liberation, which is the eternal service of the Supreme Lord in Sri Vaikuntha, or even here in this material world, that service to the Supreme Lord, meaning the Supreme Lord himself and his service, they are the goal. Any other fruit than that, be it a material fruit or even a spiritual fruit like kaivalya, enjoyment, self-enjoyment of the soul, is considered an obstacle to the real purushartha, or the real goal, right? Which is the eternal service of the Lord Sri Vaikuntha. So ordinary material fruits, even the spiritual fruit of the transcendental fruit of impersonal liberation or kaivalya, isolation and meditation on the bliss of the soul, or Brahmanubhava. Brahma means spirit. Anubhava means the enjoyment of the spirit. So Brahmanubhava. And the idea of deriving sense gratification or gaining satisfaction for oneself by doing the divine service. Now, ultimately, one may not have those lower understandings of the goal, right? Misunderstandings of the goal, but he may think, oh, the Supreme Lord's service in Sri Vaikuntha, that is the goal. That's the goal. But the goal is for me to enjoy that. But even enjoying that, and we've discussed this in some other books in Mamukshapati. Sometimes it is said that the persons who are serving the Supreme Lord, they pray not to be bewildered or to be overcome with the bliss of the service, so much so that they are stunned and they're unable to continue the service. So the service is the goal, and therefore anything that stops the service is anti the goal. It's against the goal, or is an obstacle to the goal. So an obstacle to the goal can be being stunned by the beauty of the Lord, or being full of bliss in the service of the Lord, so much so that one cannot continue the service. Right. So gaining satisfaction for oneself by doing the divine service. So that is not the goal, to gain satisfaction for oneself by doing that service. That comes along with the service. Of course, the greatest bliss is to serve the Supreme Lord, right? But it's not something that we're not after that bliss, we're after the service. Okay, so then continue on. The fourth section, or the fourth principle here, is the upaya virodi. Remember, the upaya is the means, and we talked about the means. What were the means again? The means were karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, acharya abhimana, and prapati, right? So sharanagati, so approaching, having faith in the guru, but also surrendering to God. So the anti-means, or what is hostile to the true means, it is the notion that other means, those noted under the upaya rupa section, right, the means principle section, are of equal, if not more, efficacy, right? So if somebody says to you, well, property is okay, you do property, but actually karma yoga is just as good as property, or better than property. Bhakti yoga is just as good or better than property. Jnana yoga is just as good or better than property. This is wrong. So if not equal, if not more efficacy, so it is the notion that other means, those noted under upaya swarupa, are of equal, if not more, efficacy than the means, numbers E4 and E5, right? E4 and E5 again would be property and acharya abhimana, which are normally practiced by, both things are practiced. We surrender to the guru, we have great faith in the guru, or also the guru is a mediator like Sri Devi, who helps us to surrender to God, and surrender to God. God is the way, is the main means, the primary means. So those under E4 and E5, which requires that those should be discarded, So following the proper means, which is the proper means are property or Sharanagati, surrender unto the Supreme Lord. And that is the primary means. And we do that through a mediator, so Sri Devi, and also through the Acharya. The Acharya, therefore, resorting to the Acharya is also part of the means, and it is a primary, or not a primary, but an initial part of the means. So that's why he's mentioned here both those. So this requires that the others have to be discarded. Now, where do we get this idea that Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, these other means have to be discarded? We get it directly from Lord Krishna himself in the 66th verse of the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Sarva dharman parityaja. In this case, we recognize the word dharman. Sarva dharman is meaning all these different paths of self-effort, such as Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. They have to be given up. They have to be discarded. Prityaja, completely abandoned. Or at least looked down upon as subordinate and unimportant. The notion of doubt, whether this means that E4 and E5, again meaning property and Acharya Abhimana, right, resorting to the Acharya and surrender to God. So it can be so simple and light as described. The notion of doubt, whether this means that property and Acharya Abhimana can be so simple and light as described, and therefore the fear that it cannot be an efficient means to the goal, right? So, okay, the first Virodi, the first thing is that thinking that the first misunderstanding, the first thing which is an obstacle to us taking to the means. What are the means? The real means are property and Acharya Abhimana. These are the real means. What's the obstacle to that? The first obstacle is thinking that Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga are equal or greater than these other two means. The second obstacle, right, is the notion of doubt whether these means, right? So once having thought that, we give up that idea that Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga are equal or greater means than Sharanagati or property and Acharya Abhimana. Give that up. Then think about it, Acharya. Thinking about how easy these are, approaching the Guru and surrendering unto God. These are very, very simple means, right? That the Lord is taking the burden himself, and there's no qualification for anybody else to take to these means. Even animals can do it. In the case of Gajendra, even a lady like Draupadi could do it, and even a demon like Rakshasa, like Vibhishana could do it. So then thinking about them, thinking about the actual means of property and Acharya Abhimana, and thinking that they're so simple. It's so simple to do that, so easy to do that, right? And therefore the fear that it cannot be an efficient means because it's so simple, right? Because it's so simple, because it's so easy, and because it's so sure and so safe, right? To think it couldn't be the way. And this is when we explain these means to some people, even though they're Vaishnavas, even though they're people who are surrendered to the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana, still, and they're following paths like Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, right? With much effort on their part. Still, when you explain to them a very easy way, they say, no, it couldn't be that easy. It could not be that easy. I cannot accept that it's that easy. It must involve my qualification, my effort. It must involve me from doing something. But once again, we understand the true nature of the soul is just like a piece of inanimate property of the Supreme Lord. It is the Supreme Lord's property. Once we realize that we are just like a slave of the Supreme Lord, the slave doesn't have to do anything to be a slave. The slave is a slave. the piece of property belongs to the Supreme, belongs to the person. A person has a piece of property. The piece of property doesn't do anything to become the property of a person. It's not that we are even performing property or doing something, because it is simply a realization that we are the property of the Lord. So therefore, the fear that it would be an ineffective means, because it seems so easy. Okay, so that's the second thing, which is a upaya virodi, an obstacle to understanding the true means. The notion that the fruit or the goal is so great, and therefore the fear that it is absurd or audacious to expect it to happen, or to be had for the mere asking. So we just ask, or we just pray, Lord, I'm yours. And then such a great gift of eternal service to the Supreme Lord in Vaikuntha or moksha is bestowed upon us. And to think that is such a great goal, how can it be achieved so easily? Right? This is a misunderstanding. It is already, actually, it's already achieved. We already are the property of the Lord. We already are his eternal servants. So it's just a matter of realizing our status. And the notion that the obstacles to one obtaining an end are so great and so many, and therefore the fear that the end is beyond reach, right? As against such tremendous odds obstructing the postulant or the person, the prapana, the person who's surrendering, right? So this was also explained in the Charma Sloka by Lord Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. Arjuna was thinking, what is stopping me from doing all these things that Lord Krishna said, karma yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, or even surrendering and giving those things up? What's stopping me from doing that? What is stopping me from doing that? What's stopping me from surrendering to Krishna is the mountain of sins from the unlimited lives that I've taken before, and I've committed so many sins, and that karma, and also pious activities too, the karma from the pious activities, the good karma. So good karmas and bad karmas, the results of my actions over unlimited lifetimes, are weighing down upon me, and they cannot be discarded immediately, and therefore I'm unable to take to this path of surrender. But Lord Krishna says, Sarva Dharmam Prityaja, right? Abandon all varieties of paths of self-effort, of these methods of self-effort, these upayas, these other means, abandon these other means, and just surrender unto me. I will liberate you from all your worries. Or what are your worries? Your worries are from having the karma of unlimited births. Sarva pape bhyo moksha yishyami. Moksha yishyami is the future tense of the verb. Moksha yishyami. I, it's one person, right? Yishyami means I will do that. Ish means will, I will do. Ish ami means I. So moksha yishyami, I will liberate you. Sarva pape bhyo, from the reactions to all sinful activities. Papa means sins, means the reactions to sins, and the sins are also the punyas, also the good karmas, the bad karmas. I'll liberate you from all the reactions from all those things, and that's how you will attain moksha. You will attain liberation. Right. So that's also an impediment if we think that no, I have so many karmas. Surely I have to stay for many, many lives in this material world before I can reach Sri Vaikuntha, I can reach the Lord's service. No, that's not true. In the end of this very life, one will go to Sri Vaikuntha if one is surrendered to the Supreme Lord. Okay, and the fifth section, Prapti Viroti, or the anti-fruit or the anti-gain, and there's a footnote here, or what is hostile to what is one's ultimate end or ideal of life, right? That ideal being God, right? He's the what is to be gained is the God or the service of God, Sriman Narayana. To sin against him is but defeating of that ideal. The next is sinning against the godly. So first, the first thing, which is the obstacle to gaining the Supreme Lord, right, is to not follow his instructions, which he has given in the Shastras. But we have to understand those instructions. So for instance, if you only read the first part of the Bhagavad Gita and you read about Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, then naturally you will want to follow those things, those paths. Therefore, that's why we approach an Acharya. The Acharya is going to tell us, yes, there's Karma Yoga, yes, there's a system of Bhakti Yoga, yes, there's a system of Jnana Yoga. But actually the system of property, Acharya and Acharya Abhimana, these are the proper systems, these are the better systems to follow. These are the easier and safer systems to follow. And therefore, and actually, according to the Southern School of Sri Vaishnavism, the Tengalaya Acharyas, these are really the other things are not to be followed actually. So although Lord Krishna preaches Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, right? They're accepted by the Northern School, the Vadagalais Acharyas, they accept them as being legitimate paths to liberation. But the Tengalai say no, they are not even legitimate paths because they should be given up because of the tinge, the self-effort required to do those things involves a tinge of ahankara and mamakara, I-ness and minus, or false ego, which has to be totally given up if one wants to attain the actual goal of liberation. Even Kaivalya Mukti, or Kaivalya, or isolation, liberation in isolation, thinking of the bliss of the self, Brahmanabhava, involves a slight amount of selfishness, that I want to enjoy only the bliss of my soul. I don't want to enjoy the service of the Supreme, the service to the Supreme. So that ideal being God, to sin against him, meaning to not understand fully and properly and to follow what the Lord gives in the Shastras. And there are many rules and regulations in the scriptures. And we have to take what is the main and what is the most important sections of that. And some other things may, so for instance, if somebody says, well, you're not, as proper as you're not performing Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, or Jnana Yoga properly, that's fine because we've abandoned those things. Therefore, we don't have to perform those things properly because we're not performing those things. Now, it's not that we don't work. We do karma. We do work, and we offer the fruits of the work to God. Of course, we think that God is working through us, right? It's not actually us that is doing the work. We do study. We study shastras and we study different things. But it's not the study is the thing which is liberating us, or the work, or offering of the fruits of the work. It is not the devotional acts that are the thing which is causing the Lord's mercy to descend upon us and for us to attain liberation. We're not asking for that. We're not praying for that. Still, we perform devotional acts, right? So we do karma, jnana, and bhakti, no doubt, but we don't do them as yogas. We don't do them as means or upayas to liberation. So to sin against God, that is the first. It means against his orders. The understanding, the understanding of that is given through the acharyas and through the scriptures, right? Or by him himself in his charma sloka, right? So Krishna may have said in other parts of the Gita to do this or do that. He says, go to the forest and sit on a deer skin and an asana and meditate on looking at the tip of the nose. But we don't have to do that because later on in the Bhagavad Gita, a later instruction supersedes an earlier instruction. The final instruction is the one that we have to take most to heart, and that is, just surrender unto me. I'll protect you. I'll save you. I'll liberate you from all the reactions to the sins. If you just surrender unto me, abandon all these other methods like that. So that is the ultimate thing. So sometimes some people will say, well, no, you're not following all the scriptures. That's true. We're not following all the scriptures. We're following the main thing. We're following the last instruction. We're following the final or the topmost instruction. So, and whatever is against that, whatever is opposite to that is wrong and is a sin. So in that sense, the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas, the Southern Acharyas, see even performance of Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga as sinful, in a sense. Right. So that's the first thing. That's the first Prapti Virodi. The second thing is one may be like that, and one may be serving the Supreme Lord and may be thinking about only service to the Supreme Lord. He should not forget to also serve the godly. Because along with the Supreme Lord, we have the Lord's consorts, his associates like Mahalakshmi and all of these other, the Acharyas, the Vaishnavas. And ultimately, we see all living beings as being associated with the Lord or being part of the Lord. And therefore, we have to serve everybody. Right? So specifically here, though, it says next is sinning against the godly. So there are these two sins. What is a sin? A sin in Sanskrit is aparada. Aparada means an offense, offending. So an aparada against God is called a Bhagavat aparada. Bhagavat means God. Bhagavata is the devotee of God, is the prapana, is the surrendered soul. So there's Bhagavan and Bhagavata. So there's Bhagavat and Bhagavata, right? So a Bhagavat apachara is a sin against God. The next thing is a sin against the godly, the persons who are surrendered to God. A Bhagavata apachara, that is also a prapti virodi. That's also stopping us from attaining the ultimate goal or the ultimate gain or fruit, which is the service of the Lord in Sri Vaikuntha. So next is sinning against the godly, right? So that's the first one is sinning against Bhagavat apachara. It's apachara or aparada is the same word in Sanskrit. It means offense. Achara means action, means behavior. So apachara is bad action, right? Aparada also means offense or bad action. So aparada or apachara. So Bhagavat apachara means against God. Bhagavata apachara is worse, is considered worse, and is offense against the Prapanas or the Vaishnavas or the godly. So we have the sin against the God, the sins against the godly. The third is what is called the heinous sins or heya, heinous sins, begotten of the soul and body intimacy, devoid of remorse, atrocious and persistence in performance. Third is called the heinous sin, heya, begotten of the soul and body intimacy, devoid of remorse, atrocious and persistent in performance. So the third one is that ahankara and mamakara, thinking of I and mine as being. So not only we sin against God, we sin against the servants of God or the godly, but also a sin against ourselves, our very nature. The sin against our very nature is to have ahankara and mamakara, to think that we to have that false ego, that we are something other than like an inanimate object or a servant or a slave of the Supreme Lord. That is the third thing. So sins of food. So there are some other sins which are mentioned here. Sins of food is hostile to knowledge or dawning wisdom. So it's spoken about in the Bhagavad Gita, I believe it's the 16th chapter, which talks about the modes of material nature. And there's food in the mode of ignorance, the food in the mode of passion, food in the mode of goodness. And so different types of food can also be elevating or depressing us, our nature, according to the different modes of material nature that we encounter while we're embodied in this material world. So sins of food is hostile to knowledge and drawing wisdom, right? So sometimes people cannot understand things because they're eating food which is affecting them. Sins of company is hostile to bliss and reaping of the fruits of real bliss. So keeping the company of other persons who have wrong ideas and have wrong influence over us because of And this is the thing, that contamination or sin occurs also by not only by our own efforts, sometimes either our efforts, our sins of omission or commission. So there can be sins of commission, things that we do that are sinful, things that we don't do, which incur sin, because we don't do something which needs to be done, or we do something which shouldn't be done, right? At the same time, being in contact with things in the lower modes, like fruit of the mode of ignorance, fruit of the mode of passion, fruit of the mode of goodness, or associating with people in the mode of ignorance and mode of passion, mode of goodness, right? Keeping in company with sinful people. Sins of self or self-love is hostile to the self nature, right? So even this idea ultimately of isolation, of self-realization without God, right? Kaivalya mukti, serving, self-serving is what he's talking about here. Sins of the self and self-love is hostile to the self nature, as defined in the Swaswarupa principle. So this is his full explanation of the Prapti Virodi. So here's all the different obstacles. So we went through, just to quickly go through it again and summarize. We had these 5 obstacles: obstacle to the nature of the soul, obstacle to the nature of God, obstacle to the nature of the goal, obstacle to the nature of the means, and obstacle to the nature of the attainment or the goal. Okay, so, and the conclusion of the book: to the man in whom has dawned the knowledge of these 5 truths, right? So this is something like a Palashruti or something like that. He's going to tell us, if you understand these 5 principles and their divisions. So we had 5 basic principles, and they're divided up into another 5 each one divided into 5, so 25. To the man in whom has dawned, man or woman or person, right? Who has dawned the knowledge, in whom has dawned the knowledge of these 5 truths, in whom has arisen the thirst or desire for final release or liberation, but who has still to live in this world in the midst of the worldly. The manner of spending that life till release is obtained, and so that worldliness may not again besiege or inveigle him, is laid down briefly as follows. Okay, so he's saying, once you understand these things, you understand what we've discussed in this book, then here's how you should act. He shall. Okay, so we did have in the previous thing, the anti-fruit. There was a footnote here. The fruit is service or reaching the goal. Disservice, apachara, is what is averse or hostile to that service. Divine service is service to God and all that is his, and avoidance of what is contrary to that. Okay, so now let's start again. He's going to give in a nutshell the way that we should live our lives after having understood these 5 principles, the Artha Pancakam. He shall earn food and raiment, food and clothing and shelter, etc., right, in accordance with the rules of Varna and Ashrama and Vaishnavism. Okay, so he's mentioned two principles here. He's mentioned the principles of Varna and Ashrama, and the principles of Varna and Ashrama can be understood from the Smritis, but the Smriti Shastras specifically deal with a certain type of society in India, medieval India. But really, if we go deeply into the meaning of Varna and Ashrama, the different classes in society and the different stages of life, we find that these things actually find their origin in the Vedas, in the Purusha Sukta, Brahmanosya Mukhamasi Bahu Rajan Yakutaha Uru Tarasya Vaishaha Padyam Sudro Jayata, that there are these different parts of the body, of the social body of society, right? There are people who are intellectuals, there are people who are administrators, there are people who are entrepreneurs, and there are people who are workers. And these can be found in all society, all societies, even in animal societies, we can find sometimes these classes. But what to speak of, certainly in human societies, we find these different classes in all things. And there are rules and there are regulations and there are ways of acting in those different societies, right? They may differ around the world slightly, but in general, they're like that. So not necessarily all the minute rules of medieval Indian varnashram system, but the varnashrams, the concepts of varnashram in general, right? And also the concepts of Vaishnavism, and they should not be in conflict. These two should not be in conflict. There might be some rule in varnashram. Like we see with the Tengalai Acharyas, they don't worry about there's a rule in Indian medieval varnashram according to certain Shmriti Shastras that Sudras and Mlechas and Yavanas and people from outside living in certain physical places and following from certain cultures and also women cannot chant the Omkara, right? Which we've seen that the Tengalai Sri Vaishnavas don't accept that because they follow a higher principle from Vaishnavism that says everyone should get the Astakshara mantra Om Namo Narayana and everybody can chant that. So we have the principles of Varnashram and the principles of Vaishnavism, which sometimes supersede some of these other principles of Varnashrama. So these have to be observed, right, in our normal lives. And the footnote says we can see Appendix 7. I'm not sure if we have the appendices here, but we'll see later. He shall invariably offer them to God. He shall invariably offer them to God. So the things that he earns, his housing, his shelter, his raiment, his clothes, his food, everything that he has, he should offer those to the Supreme Lord and give to the godly also, right? He should also give to the godly, that is, give in charity to the prapanas and the persons who are also similarly surrendered to God. And he shall use his earnings no further than his physical wants demand. That may be very difficult. That may be very difficult for many people to do. But the idea here is, and we've heard this also in other forms of Vaishnavism, they say, don't work harder than you need to just continue living in this material world until you get final release and go to Sri Vaikuntham. And there's no need to over-accumulate money or property or anything, any material thing like that. And look upon them as gifts from God, those things which are sent to you, right? In the spirit of, let's say, the Isopanishad, the first which is part of the Yajurveda, is the 40th chapter of the Shukla Yajurveda is the Isopanishad. It is sometimes called Samhita Upanishad because it comes in the Samhita section of the Vedas. And it says, Isavasyamidam sarvam yatkincha jagatam jagate tena chaktena punjita madgudakasya swiddanam. Isavasyamidam sarvam. That one should remember that everything belongs to God, and therefore everything, one who takes these money, property, food, clothing, shelter, all these different material things which are given to us by God, which are created here for us to live in this material world and to sustain our bodies, right, our lives, right? These are all gifts from God, and therefore we should see them as gifts from God, and we should offer them back to God. We should understand that they are his and not ours. So look upon them as gifts from God. He shall show gratitude to his spiritual teacher. So all the teachers that one has, one should show gratitude to them. At least in a very cursory way, one should say, Asmat Guru Pyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Guru Pyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Guru Pyo Namaha. Offer respects, at least mentally and verbally, right? We can offer respects to our teachers, and we can prostrate before our teachers. We can offer service to our teachers, as it was said, as part of the goal service to Sriman Narayana is also service to his associates, his consorts, and the acharyas, the alwars. We can worship them in different ways. We can worship them directly. We can worship them by our intelligence, by learning the sacred hymns of the alwars, by learning the shastras, and by learning the Bhagavad Gita, by learning the holy scriptures and things. These are all ways of using our intelligence to serve these acharyas and the Supreme Lord. So he shall show his gratitude to his spiritual teacher, who takes pains to open in him the gates of knowledge. Right? So we say this, agyana timirandasya. We were in ignorance, agyana. What is that ignorance compared to? It's compared to a timirandasya. A timirandasya means a dark well of ignorance. Like if there's an abandoned well, which is covered with some grass, and we walk and we fall into it by mistake, and we're at the bottom of the well, there's no light, and we're completely in darkness. So, agyana timirandasya, jnananjana. Anjana means an ointment or a medicine. Jnananjana, with the medicine of knowledge. Jnana anjana, right? Shalakaya chakshur unmilitam. Chakshur unmilitam yena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I offer my respects to my gurus who have opened my eyes. Chakshur means eyes. Unmilitam means to open. With this medicine of knowledge. And I was in the darkness of ignorance, just like falling down into a abandoned well. So we have to offer our respects and gratitude to our teachers. We can never repay the teachers, the spiritual teachers. We can never repay them for what they're doing, for the knowledge that they're giving to us. The only way to approach repaying the teacher, we cannot repay the teacher, but to approach repaying the teacher, the only way is to teach what he has given us. He or she has given us, right? And so by propagating that knowledge, by giving others the knowledge that we've also received from our teacher, and there are different teachers, of course. There's the Diksha Guru, the Shiksha Guru. There's also the Chaitya Guru. There's also the Supreme Lord, because ultimately all knowledge comes from the Supreme Lord. Lord Krishna says this in Bhagavad Gita. He says, "I dwelling within the heart, am the source of all knowledge, all forgetfulness, all knowledge and all forgetfulness." He's the source of that, the Chaitya Guru. Because people meet teachers and the teachers try to teach them, but sometimes a teacher will teach something to somebody and that person cannot understand. He just cannot accept it. He cannot realize it, the knowledge which the teacher is giving him. Whereas another time, another person is immediately the teacher says something, immediately they understand. What does that mean? It means that people are different, and the Supreme Lord allows one person to understand and allows another person not to understand. So the super soul, or the Supreme Lord within everybody, right, is the one who's allowing us to understand. The knowledge is coming from him ultimately, Chaitya Guru, the Guru inside, like that. Now, of course, sometimes we call this intuition or realization or an epiphany, right? Somebody has a realization. It comes from inside. The Lord gives us that realization, like that. How do we know whether that realization is correct or not? Because sometimes people have these wrong notions. They think within their mind something. Oh yeah, God told me, to go out and kill these people or do this or do that. I heard this inside. There are people who are madmen who feel like that, right? So Lord Krishna, of course, told Arjuna to go and fight on the battle. That was his swadharma. That was what he was supposed to do. That was his duty. Whereas it is not the duty of everybody to go out and kill people. So we're not talking about in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna says you should go out and you should go and start a war. So how do we know if our intuition, if our inner thought, if our realization, if our epiphany is correct or not? If it's actually coming from God, or if it's just our own mental speculation? We have to judge that by the scriptures, by the words of the acharyas, by the words of our teachers, by the holy the holy commandments in the books. We have to judge those things. And if those things all line up, then yes, that's a realization. That's an epiphany. That's a proper sign. That's proper knowledge coming from God. So he should take pains to open, who takes pains to open to him the gates of knowledge. So it's the guru who's opening that up to you, right? Because you have a certain realization, and the guru is confirming that. He's saying, yes, what you said is correct. What you've understood is correct. It's said like that in the scriptures, and it's also said like that by the acharyas, and therefore what you said is correct. And that is the confirmation. So we need to confirm those that realization, that knowledge that's coming from the heart. So he shall show gratitude to his spiritual teachers, right? Who take pain to open to him the gates of knowledge, and shall behave after his heart, right? He should behave with God and with the holy acharyas and other Vaishnavas according to his heart. He shall acknowledge his humility before God, right? What does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita? Manmana bhava madbhakto majjijimam namaskuru mami vaishasi satyam te patijane priyosime. In another place, he says, Manmana bhava madbhakto majjijimam namaskuru mami vaishasi yuktvaivam atmavan matparayanam. So he says, both in two slokas, he said, it's very important. Always think of me, bow down before me, right? This is how we acknowledge the Supreme Lord, by thinking constantly of him, right? Just as Ramanu just said, like pouring oil, anushmiti or samadhi, pouring, first of all comes dhyana, right? We do this when we're performing different rituals. We want to think of a particular form of God, so we perform a dhyana. Means we chant a particular verse and we think about the meaning of the verse, and that puts our mind in the right frame of reference for worshiping that particular form of God. That is called dhyana. So dhyana means meditation. Meditation is not impersonal. Sometimes we hear from Buddhists and from other people that, you just sit and think about your breath or something like that. No, meditation means thinking about the Supreme. Thinking about the Supreme. It means meditating upon the Supreme. Sometimes, of course, there could be the Kaivalyarti, the person who's interested in isolation moksha, right? That person simply meditates on the soul. But normally, the point of meditation is meditating on the Supreme. So that first stage is called, out of there are 8 stages, of course, in the Ashtanga Yoga, asana, pranayama, etc. Yama, niyama, pratyahara, pranayama, pratyahara, asana, etc. So you get dhyana. Dhyana means meditation. From dhyana, when dhyana becomes more fixed, it becomes dharana, carrying that meditation. And then ultimately samadhi. So samadhi means, as Ramanu just says in the Sri Bhashya, the constant remembrance, which is like the unbroken stream of oil, pouring oil from one pot to another. That is how he describes it, the analogy that he gives. So he shall acknowledge his humility before God, bowing down and always thinking is more important than bowing down. But physically bowing down, using our mind, our words, and our body in the service of God. So he shall acknowledge his humility before God and his ignorance before the teacher. Right? What does Krishna say in the Bhagavad Gita? He says, Tad vidi paripatrena paripashnena sevaya upadekshanti te gyam gyaninastat pradarshinaha. Approaching a person, a teacher, with humility means asking not challenging questions, but questions that are good for getting the result, which is knowledge. Not challenging questions, but asking the question, a certain type of submissive question. I really want to know the answer to this question. Not questioning what the guru says, in the sense that asking questions in a way which is dismissive of the teacher, but trying to actually find out the reality of the actual answer. He shall acknowledge his humility before God, his ignorance before the teacher, and his obedience before Sri Vaishnavas. There's a footnote here. Sri Vaishnavas. Who are Sri Vaishnavas? Let's see. Footnote 1. Footnote 1C, Appendix 8. Okay, so we're going to have appendices here. So let's see. We'll have to go then. Okay, so obedience before the Sri Vaishnavas, specifically the Acharyas, right, the teachers, but all Sri Vaishnavas. He shall practice isolation from the worldly. So associate with the Sri Vaishnavas, associate with the teachers, the gurus, like that. And isolate yourself from people who are worldly, who are non-Vaishnavas. He shall languish for liberation. He shall desire for liberation. He should look forward to attaining liberation, which occurs videha mukti, after the fall of this body. He shall persist in the path that he has chosen. Persist in the path that you've chosen. What's the path that we've chosen? The path that we've chosen is the path of property or sharanagati, surrender to God, where God actually does everything. And that path includes acharya abhimana, or surrender to the teacher, as an anga, as a part of it. It can be done separately too for those people who don't know how to at all. If they have absolutely no enough education to understand how to surrender to God, they can simply resort to the acharya, and that is called acharya abhimana separately. But normally, acharya abhimana and bhagavad property is done simultaneously. He shall persist in the path that he has chosen. Persist in it. Don't give up. He shall dread all that is inimical to his purpose. Right? Watch out for the virodhis, the obstacles. Constantly be dwelling upon the obstacles. Not constantly. We don't constantly have to think about the obstacles, but we do have to think about the obstacles. Think about driving a car or any vehicle. We not only have to positively steer and positively put our foot on the accelerator, but we also have to watch the road, and we have to see that there are any obstacles. We have to avoid those obstacles. So he shall dread all that is inimical for his purpose. He shall not love his body. What does that mean? Self-love, meaning that he should do not be attached to the body or the mind or the physical attributes. Be more attached to the soul. Be more attached to God. He shall be earnest in his upward effort, his effort to go upwards, his effort to go for emancipation. He shall ever be alive to his spiritual nature. He shall feel powerless to protect, or an inability to save himself. This is also part of property. Feel helpless and hopeless. Feel unable to save oneself. He shall bear in mind, and thus we become saved by the Lord. When we give up, when we stop struggling so hard to save ourselves. He shall bear in mind the solemn sublimity of the object of his attainment. So you should take it seriously. He shall be grateful for good received. He shall, above all, adore his mediator and follow him. Who are our mediators between us and God? They are, first of all, the Acharya, second of all, Sri Devi, Mahalakshmi. So armed with the knowledge of the five truths and adorned by the conduct ensuant therefrom, right? So we have this knowledge, and we also act upon this knowledge. We act as though we understand this knowledge. The pilgrim. So here the Prapana is described as a pilgrim. The pilgrim to the kingdom of God. Just like I gave that example of a person who wants to go on a trip. Right, the person who is the pilgrim. He wants to go onto a trip to a holy place. So that is what we are. We are pilgrims in waiting. We're waiting to go on that trip to Sri Vaikuntham to serve the Supreme Lord eternally, like that. So the pilgrim to the kingdom of God becometh to him an object dearer to him than all the heavenly hosts, eternals and archangels, ever near to him. Right. So that person who is a prapana, who is a surrendered person, he is even more dear to the Lord than all of the Nityasuris, all of his consorts and his servants there in Sri Vaikuntham, right? So it's very much like this passage here is very much like the story of the prodigal son in the in the Bible. There's one son that goes away and is rebellious against the family and against the father. And then he comes home. When he comes home, he's considered he's loved even more by the family and by the father before returning, like that. So here's the similar sort of idea. He becometh to him, the Supreme Lord, an object dearer to him than all the heavenly hosts, eternals, and archangels ever near to him. Nay, dearer to him than even Shri herself, the Prapana, the surrendered soul, the mischievous, rebellious soul who has come back to the fold of God, right? Just like like I said, the prodigal son. And he finishes here with a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 55, which he quotes. And he says, "He that works for me, strives for me, unasking, gives himself to me, that guileless friend of all that lives, soon comes to me, O Pandava." So this verse is, I believe it's Yat Karosi Yadasnasi Yat Jahosi Dadasi Yat Karoshi. Tat Kurushwamararpanam. Maybe it's that one. I'm not sure. Okay, we'll have to look that up. So he says, "Hail, all hail to thee, all beloved God," is how he finishes off like that. So let's have a look at here at the appendices. So we have Appendix 1. The term Bhagawan gives the conception of the divinity as that which is all-knowing, Jnana, all-powerful, Shakti, all-strong, Bala, all Lord, all lordship, Aishwarya, all capable, Virya, and all bright, Tejas. And there's a footnote here. He says, the very ancient name for expressing this concept of God, common to the whole Indo-European race, is Deva. In Latin, this is Deus. Deus in Latin means God. He says here, Lithuanian Dievas, meaning bright. This is only one attribute of the many that are denoted by the term Bhagawan. It may also be noted that Bhagawan is an epithet or a name, nomenclature or name, of the deity to which Shaivas, those who worship Shiva as supreme, as well as Vaishnavas, and every other denomination, including Buddhists and Jains, right, subscribe. So this word is common. It's used by Buddhists, it's used by Jains, it's used by Shaivites, it's used by Hindus, and we use this term Bhagawan to mean the supreme, right? Our concept of the supreme. There's one verse that says, Yam Shaiva Yamopasati Shivi iti Brahmeti Vedanti Naha Bodha Buddha iti Pramana Patavaha Karteti Nyayayaka. And it goes on, talks about Jaina and everything. All these different people, they have different philosophies, but their philosophy has an ultimate, and their ultimate goal or aim or God is known by different names. But here we see the word Bhagawan is used for all of them, like that. And then he says, see Vishnu Purana, chapter 6 or canto 6, chapter 5, verses 71 to 79, which we can look up. And also Bhagavad Gita, pages 5, 6, and 10, which we don't really know, but his Bhagavad Gita we could go through and we could find those places. Okay, so that was the first footnote here on the Appendix 1. And Appendix 1, so basically was talking about, so Jnana, Shakti, Bala, Aishwarya, Virya, and Tejas are the 6 main attributes of God, right? But of course, Ananta Kalyana Gunas, he has unlimited auspicious attributes which cannot be counted. In the other part of the Upanishads, it says Parashya Shakti Vividaya Shruyate, that we have heard that the Supreme has unlimited Shaktis or unlimited attributes and powers. And these are just 6 which are broadly defined. So our acharyas add that these primary perfections of divinity are the 6 typifying an infinite number of them. And then the other footnote down here, footnote number 2 says, see page 82 of his Alkondavilli Govinacharya's book, Vande Mekam of Vedanta. The term adorable, chosen by Dr. Grierson, who, if we remember at the beginning of our lecture series on this book, gave an introduction to Artha Pancakam, accords, and there's also a footnote there. See Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, 1910 for 1910 AD, page 159. Okay, so Dr. Grierson accords with the root meanings of Bhagawan. So basically, Dr. Grierson's translation of the word Bhagawan is the adorable one. Bhaga, the Vedic god, Bhagavan, and Bhakti, right, all come from the root, the verbal root bhaj. Bhaj in Sanskrit means to adore, to love, to serve. In this treatise, we shall not be far away from the conception of Bhagavan if we translate it by the term God, that is, blessed or perfect, the blessed or perfect. Though our readers should keep in mind the warning of Max Muller, a German Indologist, as follows. We ourselves, the heirs of so many centuries of toil and thought, possess, of course, the name and concept of God, and we can hardly imagine a human mind without that name and concept. But as a matter of fact, the child's mind is without that name and concept, and such is the difference of meaning assigned by different religions, nay, even by members of the same religion, to the name of God, that a general definition of it has almost become an impossibility. Nevertheless, however, our ideas of God may differ. For us to say that the sun or the moon or a pebble or the tail of a tiger was God would be absurd and self-contradictory. And that's from his book, Max Muller's book called Physical Religion, page 116. Okay, so we should take that as a warning that we should not accept. Although we can try to understand the meaning of the word God or the term God or Bhagawan here like that, we should know that it goes much beyond our concept, which the human mind cannot fully understand. Although every human mind does have a concept of God, he says, right? Still, the real concept of God goes far beyond what the human mind can imagine. In the terms Vishnu, right, which could mean all present, right, ever present, or Vasudeva, all pervading, the all pervasive character of the divinity, which is of its essence alone, is radically evident, and not what is implied by the term Bhagawan. Here remains the immanence of the divinity to be provided for. Hence, the name Narayana, which includes all these several conceptions. So this is just an explanation of the Vyapaka names of God. What do we mean by Vyapaka? Vyapti means pervasion, all pervasion. So Vyapaka means the names of God, which are the main names of God, which deal with his all pervasion, which is the main aspect of God, or the main quality of God, or attribute of God that differs, that is different from us. We are sentient, and God is also sentient. We're all sentient beings, but the main difference between God and us is that he's all pervasive. He's everywhere. He's pervading the entire universe from outside and from inside every atom, from inside our heart, from outside the universe. So therefore, the universe is like the body. The souls and the universe are like the body of God, right? So this is described in these three names: Vishnu, Vasudeva, and Narayana. Vishnu meaning pervading from inside, Vasudeva pervading from outside, and Narayana means both, pervading from inside and from outside. And so therefore he says here the term Bhagawan, right, is different from this, but the term Narayana incorporates both the Vishnu conception and the Vasudeva conception of pervasion. So this is why the three mantras, there are three Vyapaka mantras, three most important mantras. There are many mantras of God. There are mantras with the names of God in them. Vishnu Sahasranama has 1,000 names in them. In it, there are mantras that have to do with Narasimha, have to do with Rama, have to do with Krishna. These are all Vibhava avatars or Leela avatars of God. There are mantras that have to do with Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. These are Vyuha forms of God. There are many, many forms of God, and they all have different names. And these names also have power, and therefore the mantras, which include those names, also have power. But the most powerful names, the main names, are the Vyapaka names, Vishnu, Vasudeva, and Narayana, because they describe the all-pervasive nature of God. And therefore, the three main mantras which come from them are, they're all mentioned, by the way, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, in the Narayana Vali, in the Vishnu Gayatri. Narayanaya vidmahe, Vasudevaya dhimahi, tanno Vishnu prachodayat. So Narayana, Vasudeva, and Vishnu in one mantra. Narayanaya vidmahe, Vasudevaya dhimahi, tanno Vishnu prachodayat. Right? All in one mantra. That comes from the Veda. Similarly, we have individually those names in mantras. We have the 6-syllable mantra, Om Vishnave, Om Namo Vishnave, Om Namo Vishnave, the 6-syllable mantra. The 12-syllable mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, so Vishnu Vasudeva. And then the Astakshara mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, with 8 syllables in it. So the 6, the 12, and the 8-syllable mantra, like that. Out of all of them, the word Narayana, the 8-syllable mantra, that is the greatest one, because it describes both the Vishnu concept and the Vasudeva concept of pervasion. Okay, so here he's saying, hence the name Narayana, which includes all these several conceptions, making it thus all comprehensive. So the conception of Bhagavan, the conception of Vishnu, and the conception of Vasudeva, the conception of all the 1,000 names of Vishnu, all the other mantras to Vishnu, all the other 2 Vyapaka mantras are contained within the Astakshara mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya, in the term Narayana, in the single word Narayana. Narayana is the greatest, is the most complete and greatest name of God, which includes all these several conceptions, making it thus all comprehensive. It could be shown that this name includes all the ideas of God connoted by such terms as absolute, Sat, meaning, right, infinite, Vishnu, transcendent, Para, and divine, Bhagavan, right? So here's some other concepts here. Sat actually means eternal, and here he's translated as absolute. Infinite, Vishnu, transcendent, Para, right? Para means above, right? Paramapada, the transcendent place, right? Right? Para, Vyuha, Viva, Antayama, and Archa. These are the 5 forms of God in Pancharatra. Divine, Bhagavan. This holy name has thus become to all Vedic people, which holy name is he talking about? The name Narayana. This holy name has thus become to all Vedic people the highest conception of divinity, and is the name which they look upon as their solace in life, comfort in death, and salvation after death. It is our solace in life, it is our comfort at death, and our salvation after death. The word Narayana, the name of God. When, therefore, and we see that many stories about this, the story of Ajamil who called out Narayana at the time of death in the Bhagavata, in the Bhagavad Purana. When, therefore, we employ the word God, we must be understood to represent by it all that has been briefly indicated above. So in English, we say God. What we mean actually is Narayana and the concepts that come with the full understanding of the term Narayana, right? So there's a footnote here also that says, for further reading on this topic, topics 14 and 84, etc., of our divine wisdom of the Dravida saints, another book by Alkondavilli Govindacharya is the divine wisdom of the Dravida saints. The Dravida saints meaning the Alvars, and Acharyas can put there. I think it means here specifically the Alvars. So, as to how the primary qualities group themselves and expand for cosmic work, we refer our readers to the Vyuha principle, right, described in page 88 of our Vande Mekoma Vedanta. So again, going back up here, he says, Appendix 2, page, we can see for reference, page 574. These are all mentioned in the text, and we can go. And now he's given an explanation here of Varnashrama. The Varnas or grades are formulated or stratified in Hindu society as four: Brahma, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. Brahmana means Brahmana. Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. I also explained those in English as being the intellectuals, or priestly class, the administrators or political class, the entrepreneurs or business class, the Shudras, the working class, right? And the ashramas or the stages of life, which are brahmacharya, garhastya, avanaprastha, and sannyasa, right? These are student life, married life, retired life, and renounced life, right? Both these divisions may be understood for our present purposes as intended by the foreign term caste or the caste system, right? So foreigners have seen this in India, this system, this breakdown, and it's been called the caste system. But we saw systems like this in medieval societies all over the world, like in Europe also. Okay. The Varna, literally color, the word Varna in Sanskrit literally means color, right? But also used in an occult sense, right, is peculiar to the Hindus, but the ashramas do more or less in other forms exist in other countries, also beyond the confines of India. So he's saying that the different varnas are peculiar to India, but I don't agree with that. I would say that they're there. The different classes are there in all societies. Even in communist societies where they consider everybody to be classless, it's supposed to be a classless state, still you have people who are lawyers, people who are workers, factory workers, people who are farmers, people who are businessmen, in all societies. Okay, so that's just a small introduction to the Varnashram system. There's a lot more that could be said about that. Appendix 3, which we should have seen from page 578, Swarga, an explanation about some places here, like Swarga. When we talk about Swarga or heaven, right, is but one of the many material paradises or material heavens. By the word heaven in the Christian system is understood the spiritual universe. So normally when Christians speak of the word heaven, they're talking about the divine Lord's abode. So when Sri Vaishnavas talk about heaven, we talk about Paramapada. Paramapada is heaven. It's the Supreme Lord's abode, like that. There are some material paradises, which we would call Swarga, like that. Hawaii is a material paradise. There are other material paradises, perhaps, in this material world where devatas like Indra and Brahma, reside. Okay. While by the word paradise, as described by Muslims, an approach is made to the Hindu idea of Swarga. So what he's saying is here that in Islam, they talk about paradise and it sounds like Swarga because it's a place where people go and they enjoy material pleasures, but on a much higher level. Ultramundane karma, or desire, right, is what belongs to the material regions of varying delights. Ultramundane. So material enjoyment to the greatest extent, right? Moksha is really, or actual liberation is really the heaven or the kingdom of God that is eternal, which is eternal. It is Vaikuntha, meaning the perfect. The word Vaikuntha meaning the perfect. In fact, it's a name of the Lord, the Supreme Lord in Vishnu Sahasranam. Vaikuntha, Vaikuntha Purusha Prana, Pranada Pranava Pratahu, right? We know that. Okay, so the perfect, that oft repeated, right? Quote from the Rig Veda 122:20, Tad Vishno Paramam Paragam Sarapasyanti Sorayaha Divi Vachaksuratatam Tad Vipraso Vanyavo Jagrivagum Sasamindate Vishno Yat Paramam Padam. Paramam Padam. The supreme abode or the supreme place is Vishnu's place, right? So Vishnu's supreme realm of the Rig Veda and other Vedas. And it's also described in other Vedas. Those who would know in detail the difference between Swarga and Vaikuntha, the ordinary material heaven or paradise, and Sri Vaikuntha, the spiritual heaven of the Lord, spiritual place of the Lord, are referred to the Mugalopakyana, right? It's a section of Mahabharata, 3, 259, 260, 15, 405 to 415, 491, etc. Right? We can look this up in Mahabharata. Is a section. Apakyana is a section. The Mugdalaha Apakyana is a section of Mahabharata. We can look that up, and we could also look up the scripture called Itihasa Samuchaya, number 3. Also read Bhagavad Gita, 8th chapter, 16th verse and 28th verse, and 9th chapter, 20th, 21st, 24th, and 25th verse. So there's some research for us to do. When after class, everybody can go and look at Bhagavad Gita and look at these different verses, and we can see some more about the difference between Swarga and Vaikuntha, the difference between ordinary paradise and God's heaven, spiritual world. Appendix number 5, relating to page 582. To the Hindus, all karma is sacrifice. Karma is sacrifice. When we talk about karma yoga, we mean type of sacrifice. So even if we just do mundane work, but if we offer the result of that work to the Supreme Lord, that is considered a type of sacrifice. Karma is an act. The word karma comes from the verb kar. It means to do. Karomi, I do. So karma is act, and all sacrifices are of course acts. Every act is natural, and this in time assumes the technical meaning of a most sacred and solemn act. The Agnihotra, or the fire ceremony, is in the beginning the natural act of lighting and keeping the fire on the hearth at sunrise, noon, and sunset. And in time, this became a sacred function, even to be enforced by law. The rising and setting of the sun naturally evoked gratitude and then praise, for the sun was the giver of light, heat, life, and joy. This in turn culminated in the sacred duty of Sandhya Vandanam, where we pray 3 times a day to Lord Narayana, who appears to us as Pratyaksha Devata, the God that we can see in the sky, the aspect of God that we can see in the sky, the sun. The Chaturmasya, which Chaturmasya means 4 months, is the 4-monthly sacrifice. These are all different forms of sacrifice or sacrificial acts or ritual acts. The Chaturmasya, right, or the 4-monthly sacrifice, is a simple, natural, festive celebration of the 3 seasons of the year, summer, autumn, and winter. This, after a time, becomes an artificial and complicated ritual with more and more technique associated with it as time ran on. So Chaturmasya, there are two rituals of Chaturmasya. One is the celebration of certain rituals during a 4-month period of the rainy season in India. The other is that there are some Shrauta or Vedic ceremonies or sacrifices called the Chaturmasya sacrifices. This sacerdotal practice prevailing among all nations owe their origin to the most natural and simple habits of human nature, prompted by natural phenomena surrounding it. Okay, so he's saying here that all of our rituals actually have a basis in natural phenomena and very simple habits of humankind, like that. That's a very nice understanding of it. And then he says, for more explanation of these terms, you can see the Shandilya Upanishad. Appendix number 5, relating to page 583 of the text, explains something about God in images is described as thus. And here we have a quotation here from Sri Vaishnava Samayachara Nishkarsha by Pillai Lokam Jia, not to be confused with Pillai Lokacharya, but Pillai Lokam Jia. When we see the word Jia, Jia means he's a sannyasi. So Pillai Lokam Jia was an acharya. So he says, Shri Trishashya Sarvadishtanam Dharu Bhani Yavad Iritam Vishnor Visheshadishtanam Ayaf Pindagni Van Matam. Okay, so that's a person. It says it is like electricity. So this is an explanation of the deity form, which we find in our puja rooms, in our houses, and also in the temples. The Archa Avatara, which is one of the 5 forms of God in Pancharatra. Paravyuha, Viva, Antaryam, and the last one is Archa. So we're talking about the Archa Avatara, the deity form of the Lord. So what is the explanation about the deity form of the Lord? It is like electricity which pervades a conducting wire, but which is nevertheless latent and lacking in utility till it becomes patently present by its power of illuminating darkness at the poles of a vacuum bulb. Okay, so we're talking about an old vacuum bulb and a light bulb, an electric light bulb, right? So that electricity is latent there, is hidden there until we turn the switch. When we throw the switch right to the on position, then the electricity courses through this wire and creates the illuminating power like that. So it's a similar understanding of the deity. We install the deity. After we install the deity, then the deity accepts our services and showers his mercy upon us and reciprocates with us through that particular form. And this is all described in the Agama Shastras, specifically Pancharatra Agamas, which we're going to talk about now. According to the Bhagavad Shastras, Pancharatra Agamas are also sometimes called by Sri Vaishnavas simply Bhagavad Shastras. Now, of course, all Shastras, or many Shastras, including the Vedas, originate with the Supreme, right? Everything comes from the Supreme. So we can say every Shastra, every scripture is a Bhagavad Shastra. But specifically, the term Bhagavad Shastra is used when we talk about Pancharatra Agamas. Sometimes we say Bhagavad Shastras, right? The scriptures that deal with the Supreme or are given to us by the Supreme. The types for making material representations on canvas or in sculpture, so by having a deity form, which is in the form of a painting or picture, or in the form of a physical three-dimensional deity, right, are furnished by the Vyuha and Vibhava manifestations of the deity. So the Vyuha and Vibhava manifestations of the deity, what are the Vyuha? Remember, the Para form of God is there in Sri Vaikuntha. The Vyuha forms are his expansions, and the Vibhava are his secondary expansions. So the Vyuhas are Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and from them we get the Upavyuhas, Keshava, Narayana, Madhava, Govinda, Vishnu, Madhusudana, Trivakuma, Vamana, Sridhara, Rishikesha, Padmanabha, Damodara. These are Upavyuhas. And then we also get the different avatars, Matsya Kurma, Varaham, Narasimham, Vamanam, Parashuramam, Dasarati Ramam, Balaramam, Krishnam, Kalki. These different avatars. So in the sculpture are furnished by the Vyuha and Vibhava manifestations of the deity. So when we go to a temple or in the house, we see these forms like that. And we might have some other forms like Hayagriva, or there might be a few other different forms like that, but they're all coming within these different Vyuha and Vibhava manifestations of the Lord. So see Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 46, Tenaiva Rupena Chatur Bhujena. Tenaiva Rupena Chatur Bhujena. Okay, so when Arjuna asks Krishna, he says, after seeing Krishna's universal form, he asks Krishna to see his four-handed form again, the four-handed form. So the four-handed form of God, normally these Vyuha and Upavyuha forms have 4 hands, like that. The Vibhava forms of Matsya Kurma Vraha, maybe they don't have 4 hands. Lord Rama had 2 hands, like that. So the difference between Vyuha and Vibhava is when we see Vyuha forms, they normally have 4 hands with the different conch and disc and club and lotus in them, and these other forms don't necessarily have 4 hands, but they could have 4 hands or even more than 4 hands. That's also possible. For the man forms of God, the man or human forms, human-like forms of God on earth, meaning the Vibhava incarnations, it is written that even the devas or the demigods, right, the devatas, right, desire to worship them. Deva apyasya rupasya nityam darshana kankshinaha, right? And this is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 11, verse 52. Avatareshu yad rupam tad archanti divao kashaha. This is from Vishnu Purana, first canto, fourth chapter, 17th verse. So it's an understanding of the image forms of the Lord, right? The deity forms of the Lord. Now, appendix 6, did we miss a footnote here? I'm not sure. Did we miss a footnote? No, maybe not. Okay, so appendix 6, referring to page 589. See appendix 1. The term gods requires explanation, right? So we're going to talk about the different devatas here, right? The best that we can give cannot excel that of Ruskin. So a scholar called Ruskin has written this, and so let's read it. So he says, by gods, with a small g, right? In the plural, he writes, I mean the totality of spiritual powers delegated by the Lord of the universe to do in their several heights or offices parts of his will respecting man or the world that man is imprisoned in, not as myself knowing or in security believing that there are such, but in meekness accepting the testimony and belief of all ages to the presence and the like, with genie, fairies, and spirits ministering and guarding, or destroying and tempting, or aiding good work and inspiring the mightiest. For all these, I take the general term, quote unquote, lowercase gods, as the best understood in all languages and the truest and widest in meaning, including the minor ones of seraph, cherub, ghost, wraith, and the like, and myself knowing for indisputable fact that no true happiness exists, nor is any good work ever done by human creatures, but in the sense of or imagination of such presences, right? And that's from his article here, Priority Derita 2:172. Read Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, verses 24 and 25. So this appendix 7, so we've got quite a few appendices here. So appendix 7, referring to page 590, see appendix 2 on Vana and Ashrama caste system. Vaishnavism is here added to denote all those who could embrace that faith, irrespective of those who remain within the pale defined of the caste system. So we have this system in India, and then there are other people who are outside of this system, foreigners, and therefore Vaishnavism includes all of those persons also. So here he's saying that Sri Vaishnavism or Ramanuja system, the system spoken of here by Pillai Lokacharya, right, in the Artha Pancakam, is a universal system and does not only appeal or is not only useful for those persons who are within the Vana and Ashrama system. So therefore, by adding this idea of Vaishnavism, we make it a universal system. Vaishnavism is simply the faith that acknowledges the all-pervader, Vishnu, as God. If your concept of God is that he pervades everything, that he's all pervasive, from inside, from outside, whichever way you want to look at it. But if your concept of God is that he's all pervading, then you're a Vaishnava, because Vishnu means all pervader, and that is how we understand God. Right? To all theists, God, we guess, has by this time become an all-pervading spiritual essence, involving, just like the Christians say, they say Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit, like that. The Holy Spirit pervades everything. So all-pervading spiritual essence, even the Advaitins talk about Brahman being all-pervasive, involving what is connoted by the term immanency. So there's two things in philosophy we discuss about God's nature as being immanent and transcendent. So here we're talking about the immanence of God. God is everywhere. God is within everything. God is also outside of everything. He's also transcendental. Transcendental means above or beyond. Sometimes when people think of God as being totally transcendental, they belong to religions like Judaism, which is a deistic religion. Deism means that there is some belief in God, but God is aloof. God is completely aloof from this material world. He may have created it, he may have set the ball rolling, but he is not involved in the day-to-day workings in this material world or with human beings. And sometimes, as in the Old Testament, he might appear before people as a burning bush or as an unembodied voice or something, or as some sign, right? But he doesn't normally get involved. He is aloof. He is transcendental. The idea in philosophy of understanding God as being transcendental is to keep God far away from any of the imperfections in this material world. When we say God is completely immanent, when God is completely pervading everything, then some people will say, no, this is not the way we should think about God, because God being in everything, therefore he will be affected by or tainted by the defects of the thing which he pervades. So if we say, I have some bad thing, I have some horrible thing, right? Or there's something in this material world, and we say, no, everything is pervaded by God, then he must also pervade this horrible thing or this bad thing, and therefore doesn't God take on some of the qualities of these bad things because he's immanent in the world, right? So here we talk about immanency. So the Vaishnava conception is that although he is completely immanent, he's immanent in everything. He is completely pervading everything. He's also transcendent to those things. He is not affected. And the example given to that is like a lotus flower, or like water on the leaf of a lotus. It doesn't, or water and oil. So oil will sit above the water, will float above the water, and it won't mix with the water. So God is like that. He's pervading everything, but he doesn't mix with material nature, or he's not affected by material nature. He's not covered by material nature. He says, Mama Maya Duratiya. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says, this is my material nature. This is my illusion here. This is my Maya. This is my material world. This is controlled and completely owned and controlled and supported by me, just like you are also owned and controlled and supported by me. So in no way by entering into this material nature, by pervading this material nature, do I become affected by this material nature in any way. So he is at once completely transcendental, but also completely or aloof and completely immanent or pervasive. So this is what we're talking about, immanence, but that God is pervasive and therefore he's all immanence. His immanency is perfect and complete. To Vaishnavism, therefore, every theist can belong, regardless of caste, creed, or race, right? So it's a universal, Vaishnavism is a universal philosophy. It has to do with belief in God is all pervasive, and therefore everybody has this concept of God, and therefore everybody is a Vaishnava, and therefore Vaishnavism is a universal religion. Even though we think of Vaishnavism as being a sectarian religion, it's actually a universal concept. If we take away the Sanskrit word Vaishnavism, when we say belief in God as a belief in the all-pervasive nature of the Supreme, everybody's believing in that. So it's a universal philosophy. In this simple sense, it is universal and cosmopolitan. In time, as in everything else, the term became confined to a sect, right? So this term Vaishnavism, in time, it gradually it lost its universal nature of meaning, and it became confined to a sect of religionists. Invested once again with technicalities. Sacraments seem gradually to have become its annex, the administration of which alone entitled one to be admitted as a votary into the fold of Vaishnavism. So what he's saying here basically is he's saying, okay, it's a universal philosophy. It became pigeonholed over time as a sectarian religion. And naturally, after some time, that sectarian religion adopted certain sacraments, like we have the Panchasamskara ceremony, which is a formality which people go to be admitted into the fold of Sri Vaishnavas, right? Whereas it's a universal religion, and there is really no such admitting ceremony. There is really no. Everybody is a Vaishnava. Everybody, in that sense, right? In a universal sense. Regarded in this sense, rules have been laid down as to the right ways a Vaishnava should proceed, what he should adopt and what he should avoid, and so forth, in order to gain his livelihood. So many of these rules and regulations came up, social rules and regulations came up after this, right? The code is, however, morally worthy of its name and helpful to spirituality, though restraints are placed upon the free exercise of one's power of earning, where without Varna, Ashrama, and Vaishnavism, earning was before indiscriminate. It is now, with these limitations, restricted to a narrow and elect circle cut out of the larger society. So what he's talking about is Vaishnavism from being an all-expansive and universal philosophy became pigeonholed as a sectarian religion, and then it was practiced by mainly Brahmins who were restricted in the way caste Brahmins who were restricted in the way they could earn their livelihood from teaching and performing sacrifice. Yajna, patana, dana, and pratigriya are the 6 ways that a Brahmin can earn a living, either from giving charity, receiving charity, dana and pratigriya, or yajna, performing ceremonies, rituals, and sacrifices, and teaching others how to perform those sacrifices. Yajna, patana, teaching the scriptures and being taught the scriptures, learning the scriptures and reciting the scriptures and teaching others the scriptures, right? Specifically the Vedas, but also other scriptures like this. And these are the ways that it became very narrowly defined as these are the only ways that Vaishnavas can make their living, right? So in cases of mendicancy, when somebody becomes a beggar or becomes a sannyasin or a monk or a renounced person, renounces his or even a person who's a student and goes and begs like that. So in cases of mendicancy, these rules also make the mendicant less a prey on society and urge him to adopt a less parasitic mode of life than if he were left to roam at large without them. So there are some limitations there. Also on how the brahmachari can go, the student can go and beg alms from door to door. There are also sannyasins who go and they do this unchavritti, which is also called madhukari, going and begging alms. And even grihastas and even vanaprasthas, it's possible for people to beg alms, right? Some people do the unchavritti, even as Vedanta Deshika was a grihasta. He also did this unchavritti. He went around and begged alms like that. So this is also a possibility because the Brahmin is also allowed to accept charity. There are some other castes like the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas, they're not supposed to accept charity like that. And of course the workers, the Sudras, they are simply servants of the other classes. Okay, so anyway, this is just a very interesting appendix here, which talks about the Varnashram system and Vaishnavism and how Vaishnavism was actually a universal religion and how it became somehow or other over time all these different rules and regulations of the Varnashram system and social society, and it became pigeonholed as a sectarian religion and has ways that you can do the Panchasamskara to become admitted to it, and all these other issues here. So continuing on, we have Appendix 8, which refers to page 591, the designation Sri Vaishnava, right? Because we say Vaishnavism, but then we say specifically Sri Vaishnavism is a different thing because there are Madhva Vaishnavas, There are Nimbarka Vaishnavas, there are Balaba Vaishnavas, there are Gaudiya Vaishnavas. There are all these different types. There are Ramanandi Vaishnavas, there are Ramanami Vaishnavas, there's different types, right? So the designation Sri Vaishnava comes from Sri, Sri meaning Mahalakshmi, and Vishnu, which two terms divested of all anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism means where we, in our mind, we try to create an image of God or of Sri Devi as like a human being, a human image, anthropomorphism. So divested, these two terms, divested of all anthropomorphism and an allegory, mean considered in their etymons, the mother and father of the universe, the mother and father of the universe. Just like Ramanuja says in his Sharanagati Gajam, he calls Sri Devi or Mahalakshmi Jagan Mataram, the mother of the universe. He also says Asmad Mataram, our mother, the mother of the universe, our mother. We're in the universe, we're part of the universe. She's the mother of the universe, she's also our mother, right? And Vishnu is the father of the universe. So mother and father of the universe. Shri is Charis. Charis, I'm not sure what he means by this. Charis, grace, the universal mediatrix, the female mediator, the reconciler, the peacemaker between God and the soul. Shri Vaishnavas are thus radically those who are believers in the father and mother principle of the cosmos. Whether we study nature without or from within, or the great supreme line behind both, it is governed by the two principles of justice and mercy, which is the metaphor for the father and mother, and in symbol, Vishnu and Shri. So what do we understand Vishnu and Shri to be? Beyond any anthropomorphical, allegorical or anthropomorphical understanding of them as being like human beings standing there. Beyond that, let's understand what the terms represent. The terms represent the father-mother principle of the universe, Vishnu and Shri. The justice and mercy principle of the universe, right? That's what they represent. So, in this universal sense, who is not a Sri Vaishnava? Who does not believe in the mother and father principle of the universe? Who does not believe in the justice and mercy principle of the universe? No one. It's a universal understanding. Much has been written on this theme. For a few examples of which, see note 1, page 6 of our Bhagavad Gita, and topic 17, pages 19 and 20 of our Divine Wisdom of the Veda Saints. The articles on Shri and Christ in the Theosophist, which is a magazine of the Theosophical Society, which is headquartered in Madras or Chennai, Tamil Nadu, in India. Volume 26, January and February of 1905, and Sri Parthasarthi Yogis, Sri Vachana Bhushana. So here's a Sri Vaishnava called Parthasarthi Yogi who has written a translation of Sri Vachana Bhushana, which we should look up. Pages 5 and 6, etc. Also see note on page 111 of our Lives of the Alwars. So not only did he write a book about the divine wisdom of the Alwars, of the Veda Saints, but he also wrote a book on the lives of the Alwars, the stories of the lives of the different Alwars, the 12 Alwars. Are there wives in heaven, etc.? So it's just a discussion, right? In the Sri Vaishnava system, thus, like the three postulates of philosophy, the three principles in Vedanta philosophy, which are Achit, Chit, and Isha or Ishvara, right? So we usually hear it as Chit, Achit, Ishvara, right? These are the Chit. Achit means matter, Chit means the soul or consciousness, and Isha is also conscious, but is the supreme consciousness, Isha or Ishvara, God. Are these three postulates of religion vividly set forth as follows: the motherhood of God, Shri or Bhagavati; the fatherhood of God, Vishnu or Bhagavan; the brotherhood of souls, Sri Vaishnavas or Bhagavatas. Okay, these are the terms which are used for these things, for motherhood, fatherhood, and brotherhood. in this scientifically significant language, if this scientifically significant language has in modern days been debased into civilists of party politics, who is to blame? So somehow or other, this language that we speak, all these different terms, have become sectarian terms. And when people speak them, then Christians and Muslims and people of other religions and other faiths and things like that, Jains and Buddhists, they see it as being Vaishnavism, or even the Shaivas see it as being sectarian. It's not. But it is so all the world over. There are various theories, both modern and ancient, so to what the Sri Tattva exactly signifies, right? So the exact understanding of the nature of Mahalakshmi or Sri Devi, exactly what it means. And we understand that there's even the slight differences in understanding between the Vadagalais and the Tengalais, the northern and southern schools of Sri Vaishnavism. There are not wanting those who equate or identify it with inert or inanimate jada, prakriti, or nature. There are not wanting those who equate or identify it with inert or inanimate jada, prakriti, or nature, material nature, right? So, for instance, there are many, many people who say Mother Nature. They're considering nature to be a mother, but they're also considering her to be inert and without consciousness, right? So what kind of mother is that, right? Whereas our idea of Mother Nature, is that she has a personality and she is a person, right? But they forget that the Sri Tattva is sentient and intelligent, ajada. That's what I'm saying. She is the goddess of nature, not nature itself. As God is the God of nature and not nature itself. So you have this thing called polytheism, not polytheism, but pantheism. Pantheism means that God is nature. Nature is God. Nature is God. We pray to the mountains, we pray to the streams, we pray to the oceans, we pray to the trees. Like, nature is a form of God. That is pantheism. But Sri Vaishnavism is not pantheism. We don't believe that God is nature himself. God is the God of nature. Sri Devi is the goddess of nature. She is the mother of the universe. She's not the inert universe of matter. She is a personality. God is a personality, right? They control these things, but they're not exactly inert entities, right? They're above, they're transcendental to these things. They have consciousness. They are conscious beings. She is the goddess of nature, not nature itself, as God is the God of nature and not nature itself, as some others identify him. So the pantheists, they say God is nature. Ramanuja's philosophy, however, is not, and Vaishnavism is not. Vaishnavism in general is not pantheism. It is panentheism. The word en in Greek means in, or in Latin means in. So pan means all. So when we say pantheism, it means all's God. Everything is God. No, we don't believe everything is God. We believe God is within everything. God is within everything. Pantheism. Theo, so God, is in, and pan, everything. God in everything. Panentheism. Panentheism is the Vaishnava philosophy, not just Sri Vaishnavism, but all Vaishnavism. But Sri Vaishnavism in particular is considered panentheistic. So that Sri is a conscious entity is borne out in all the scriptures, the Shastras, from the Rig Veda Sri Suktam. In the Sri Suktam, which starts Hiranyavarnam Harinim, it comes from the Kila section or the appendix section of the Rig Veda. What is it? Hiranyavarnam Harinim Suvannara Jasrajam Chandram Hiranmayim Lakshmim Jata Vedo Mama Vaha. Okay. So that Sri as a conscious entity is borne out by all the Shastras from the Rig Veda, Sri Sukta downwards, starting with the Rig Veda and in all the scriptures, Lakshmi Tantra, different scriptures. It's borne out that Sri Devi or Mahalakshmi is a personality, is a conscious entity. Here is one verse from the Skanda Purana. Aparam tvaksharam yasa prakritir jada Rupika. Shri Para Prakriti Prokta. Chetana Vishnu Samshraya. Right? Shri is the Daivi Prakriti, the divine nature of the Bhagavad Gita, and Shri of 1034 of the same authority. So in the Bhagavad Gita 1034, it describes about Shri being the divine nature, the Daivi Prakriti. It says Daivi Prakritim Ashritaha. Yes, in Bhagavad Gita, we can look that up. Okay, so this is again at the bottom here. It says, just reminding us, this is from the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, 1910. So here we have this is basically the end. We have the Artha Pancakam of Narayana Yati, edited by G.A. Grierson, M.R.A.S. M.R.A.S. means member of the Royal Asiatic Society. So I'm not quite sure about this. Let's continue on. This is perhaps just a footnote for another book, but let's go over it anyway. Okay, edited by G.A. Grierson. So this professor, or Dr. Grierson, was a famous Indologist. It says here, Vidayante means see the end. Page 568. This is a note. Long vowels are, as usual, indicated by the sign with the macron sign, which is a line, a horizontal line over a letter. Thus, Srimate. So here we see he uses on the top of the I and on the top of the E, he's put a macron like that to show that it's a long vowel. This is actually the International Standards Organization system, right? Not the IAST system, the International Association for Sanskrit Transliteration. But anyway, so so this shows the long vowels. But when they are the result of sandhi means the joining together of two different words or two different letters change, they are indicated by a caret. A caret is a little symbol that we see on top of some letters. In French, it's called a circumflex. Okay, thus Ramanuja, he says, the text is based on two manuscripts, A and B, now in the library of the Deccan College, which is a college in Chennai, Madras. There are two of these manuscripts which he's edited a copy of Artha Pancakam by this Narayana Yati, and which may be a different book than the Artha Pancakam that we're talking about here. So, or it could be a commentary by this Narayana Yati on Pillai Lokacharya's Artha Pancakam. So he says he has these two manuscripts which he made this edition from, and they come from the manuscript library of the Deccan College in Madras, probably still there, and we could probably go look them up. Manuscript A, number 152 of 1883, number 4. So there are different folios and different almirahs and cupboards where these are kept in the library. So if you want to go to Madras and look them up, you can. Is without date, right? So the manuscript doesn't have a date on it. The scribe or the person who's written the manuscript hasn't given a date. Number B, number 267 of 1879 to 1880 is dated Samvat. Samvat, S-A-M with a dot means Samvat. There are different years used in manuscripts like that. Vikram Samvat was King Vikramaditya ruled in India at a certain time, and when he ruled, he started the calendar years from his rule, and therefore basically Vikram Samvat 1864. If we subtract about 79 years, we get 1784. So we subtract some years, and we get the 1784 AD. Of course, AD means Anno Domini, which means is a Christian form of in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini, right? Dominus, Anno Dominus. So today we don't use AD, we don't use Vikram Sam, but today normally scholars use CE, Common Era, right? So CE is synonymous with AD, and before Christ, instead of saying BC, before Christ, we say BCE. So CE, Common Era, and BCE, before the Common Era, like that, is used today to be non-sectarian and not to use the Christian term or not to use the other terms. So I'm indebted to Professor Vinayak Shakaram Ghate. Ghate was a famous, this is a famous pundit or famous Indological pundit of the 18th century, 19th century, excuse me, for careful copy embodying the readings of both manuscripts. I'm also indebted to Alkondavili Govindacharya, our present author, right, for kindly reading through the proofs and making some valuable suggestions. Right, so that's Professor Grierson saying there. Srimate Ramanujaya Namaha, Sriman Akila Lokanam Nayaka Karuna Kara, Karotu Mangalam Pumsam Kamala Nayako Harihi. So this sounds very much like a Mangala Slokam at the end of the book. So here we see he's given some more Sanskrit here. Artha Atartha Pancakam Nirupyate Te Cha Jiveshvaro Paya Pala Virodhino Kyartaha. Right. So this is describing these first letters in bold type, bold large type. Jiva, Ishra, Upaya, Pala, and Virodi. These are the different sections that we went over. Tatra Jivana Lakshanam Sheshatve Sati Gyatritvam Jivatvam Te Cha Panchavida Nitya Mukta Kevala Bada Mumukshu. This is just going through and saying, I'm not sure, but this may be that he's just going through the Sanskrit, not the Sanskrit, but the Manipravala. It seems actually to be Sanskrit. Maybe it is Sanskrit. I don't see where there's any actual form of. It looks very much just like Sanskrit, and I don't see any Tamil endings at all. But anyway, the words given here in bold are the important words. So the jiva, first of all, the jivas are divided up into Nitya Mukta Kevala Bada and Mumukshu. This is just a summary like that. And we go down further, we see that Muktas and Kevalas are mentioned, Mumukshus are mentioned. Right, then we talk about Bhakti Nishta, Prapti Nishta, people who have faith and who are steady in their Bhakti Yoga or their Prapati, or the surrender. Bhakti Nishtas, Prapati Nishtas, Bhadas, Ishvara. And then we talk about Ishvara, the principle of God, being Paravyuha, Virava, Antayaman, and Archa. And it talks about that a little bit more. And further on, it talks about Mukhya and Gona. Mukhya and Gona means main and secondary. We're talking about Vigrahas, the Vivava, and the Vigrahas, the Archavatars, Swayam Vyakta avatars, deities that are self-manifest. Further on, talks about Divyam, Saidyam, and Manusham. Okay, so it talks about deities that are installed by the Devatas, installed by perfected human being, and also just installed by ordinary human beings. Then we talk about Upaya, the section on means, Kama Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Prapti Yoga, Acharya Abhimana Yoga, and we continue on. So that describes that, and there's some footnotes, and we get finally to Dripta property and Artha property, which are the two types of. So it says Artha property and Dripta property, right? Artha property and Dripta property. It's two types of property which we discussed. And then we continue on and we get to the Purusharthas. The Purusharthas are, of course, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Kaivalya, and Bhagavad Prapti. Right? So Dharma, Artha, and Kama, right? And then Kaivalya, and then Bhagavad Prapti, two types of moksha, right? The self-interested isolation moksha and the service of the Supreme Lord. So that continues on. And then we get to the Virodi, which we just discussed today. Virodi is the obstacle. So we have Swarupa Virodi, we have Parupa Virodi, Upaya Virodi, Purushartha Virodi, and Prapti Virodi, these 5 obstacles. And that basically finishes up the Artha Pancakam like that. So let's see if we come to the end here. Right. So he says at the end here, Iti Sri Paramahamsa Parivajakacharya Sriman Narayana Yati Pravara Kritav Artha Pancakam Samaptam. Okay, so basically you've got this Narayana Yati who's made a commentary in Sanskrit. But what he's done is the Artha Pancakam, now I understand what it is. The Artha Pancakam is in Manipravala, is a mixture of Sanskrit and Tamil by Pilalokacharya. This Narayana Yati has translated it. He's translated it into Sanskrit. That's very nice, like that. So apparently Grierson, let's have a look back here and see. Apparently Grierson has published this. He has published the Artha Pancakam of Narayana Yati. And we're not sure whether he published it with a translation or not, but he may have just published a critical edition of these 2 manuscripts of this book, and this is in Sanskrit. So this is very nice. I really appreciate this. I'm going to ask Dr. Tirunarayan if there's an edition of this, and I will be looking online to see if I can find an edition of Narayana Yati's Artha Pancakam, Sanskrit translation of the Artha Pancakam by Pilalokacharya. And what we will do is we should probably type this out and have a nice translation of it available for people in English. So it's very, very useful. Okay, so we've now come to the end of Artha Pancakam. So at the end of Artha Pancakam, is there any question about any part of Artha Pancakam whatsoever, or specifically the parts that we went over at this this lesson?
No questions right now, Swami. When I was listening much earlier in the start of the session, where you were talking about the Virodis with serving, just like how we discussed with Mumukshupadi recently about Dvaya Mantra and the last Namaha, which we're asking the Lord to remove that obstacle in his service, becoming startled in his service. But I just found it really, really interesting how you mentioned, and well, Pillai Lokacharya has mentioned that we don't even want the anandam. We don't even want the bliss from serving the Lord, even though the most blissful thing is, or the paramanandam, is to serve the Lord. But the prapanna, he doesn't even seek that, or he doesn't want that. And I was just thinking about, other Vaishnava communities where they attract you by saying, well, do this and you'll become blissful, or, if you do this, you'll become happy. But I guess that's just the initial stages. But to come to the higher platform is to even give up that idea that you want even bliss or happiness, because then it becomes selfish.
Yeah, it's a little bit of hyperbole also, because you're going to experience bliss. We do experience bliss. We do experience bliss. Even in this world, when we worship the Lord, we like to do these things. We enjoy them, right? Who hasn't sat down to a wonderful prasadam feast and enjoyed it, right? So you have some Vaishnava systems, like you have the Swami Narayan cult. Okay, so you have the Swami Narayan sect. Right, the Swami Narayans are supposed to be coming from Sahajananda Swami, who is Swami Narayan, who was a disciple of Ramananda, and Ramananda was a disciple of supposed to be a disciple of Ramanuja in a dream, right, or in trance. And so somehow or other, the Swami Narayans are somewhat linked to the Sri Vaishnava Sampradayas. In the Swami Narayan situation, they have the system of Varnashrama, and they have what they call tyagis. They have sannyasis or tyagis, people who are supposed to be renounced. And every Vaishnava eats prasadam, Vishnu prasadam. We enjoy very nice foodstuffs that are offered to Lord Krishna prasadam. So what the tyagis do is they don't want to relish the individual taste. So they get a cloth, they put all the food in the cloth, they wrap the cloth up like that, and they soak it in water. They immerse it in water, and then they pull it out, and then they eat that. It's all mixed up and then immersed in water. So it has very bland taste. Because they don't want to be attracted to a particular taste like that. What to speak of, they won't even see a woman, right? They will avoid completely seeing women. They have all these rules like that. So we're not so fanatic like that. Of course, it's a bit of a fanatic attitude here that we say, the ultimate is to serve God in Sri Vaikuntha, but we shouldn't enjoy it. It's not that we shouldn't enjoy it. We will enjoy it, but we don't pray to enjoy it. Our goal is not the enjoyment. Our goal is not the enjoyment. Enjoyment is there, but the goal is not the enjoyment. Like that. So that's the difference. So it's not that we actively seek not to enjoy, but we pray that our enjoyment doesn't inhibit our service. That's all. Like that. That doesn't inhibit our service. Yeah.
And the other thing about the Kaivalya Muktas, that you're saying that has like a little bit of ego. But I was thinking that that's the greatest ego, basically. Isn't it that to think that, you're just blissful of yourself alone and nothing else and no one else, including the Lord.
Okay, I think we still have to remember that the Kaivalyartis, they're still transcendentalists. They're still people who are interested in things beyond this material world, and they're not identifying with the material body or the mind or the ego. They're trying to get beyond that. They're trying to get beyond all these things which are material, but they're caught by a slight bit of, it's like also the other Vaishnavas who are performing bhakti yoga or karma yoga, jnana yoga. It's a slight tinge of ego. There's a slight tinge of ego there. I don't think we can say that the Kaivalyartis are totally ego engrossed. Obviously, they're thinking only of the soul, but the soul is spiritual, and the Lord pervades the soul. The Lord is there, and the Lord is there in a sense, right, within all of us, because the Lord pervades everything. So therefore, the Lord is there in a sense, but he's self-serving. He sees the self as spiritual, and therefore he wants to serve the self. It's self-serving on one level, and like you say, it appears to be the most self-serving. But at the same time, because he's seeing the self as spiritual, we can't say that it's more self-serving than people in this material world who are serving the body or serving the. I understand your point. I get your point, and it's an interesting point. I would like to hear the answer that some other people would give about this question. It's a very interesting point as to whether, because we also see that if you look at the way the Gaudiya Vaishnavas look at it, they look at and many other Vaishnavas, and even the Sri Vaishnavas, we consider Kaivalya to be like the suicide. It's like spiritual suicide. It's like the worst thing. So that's why what you're saying, it's the worst thing. It's worse than being a materialist, right? Because it's a dead end. It's a dead end. It's a dead end street. I mean, so you might have a super highway, you might have a one-lane highway, right? So if you've got a super highway, you can go as fast as you like, and as many cars can go as like. If you have a one-lane highway, like here in Hawaii, sometimes we have these one-lane bridges. You're driving along the road and there's a one-lane bridge. You have to stop because somebody else is on the bridge. You can't both be on the bridge because it's one lane. So, but eventually you can go. So in this material world, when we're in this material world serving our family and our society and our country, eventually we'll go. Eventually we'll end up going to liberation. It may take a very long time. But once we go to Kaivalya, if somebody goes to Kaivalya, it's eternal and he's stuck. It's spiritual suicide. It's like, it's not a superhighway. It's not a one-lane bridge. It's a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. If you drive into a cul-de-sac, if it says cul-de-sac, if it says crescent, right? It's Moksha Crescent, Moksha cul-de-sac. You drive in there and that's it. Unless you come out the same way you came in, you're stuck. It's the end. It's finished. It's a dead end street. So it's very peaceful. Like, sometimes people in real estate, we show people different houses and things. And so sometimes we show a person a house and it's right by a highway. They don't want to be by a highway. But then other people want to be by the highway because they want to be immediately able to go to a store or to some place, some facility. They want that connection. They want to be able to go immediately someplace like that. Another person wants to be on a normal off road, with not so much traffic. I don't want to hear all the traffic all the time. I want to be linked to the outside world. The other person wants to be at the end of a cul-de-sac. He says, no, I want to be in a very quiet neighborhood, very quiet. So that's the Kaivalyartis. They want to be quiet. They don't want to hear other people. They don't want to deal with even God. They just want the bliss of the self, which we consider to be very selfish, right? That's the thing which is our last virodi, the last obstacle to our service, right? As you said, you were previously talking, the last obstacle to our service is that bliss that we get from serving the Lord. It may stop us from serving him as best we can, like that. But they want complete peace. They just want complete peace. They just want complete peace, like that. So that's why it's called isolation. It's also called nirvana by the Buddhists. The Buddhists call it nirvana. Nirvana means extinguishing. So the concept of the Buddhists is it's like a candle and the flame is extinguished. You blow out the candle, no more flame. So we have this flaming passions and problems in this material world are all extinguished. Birth, death, disease, and all are extinguished by nirvana, right? And we also, but the monists, the Advaitis, the Kaivalyartis, who want the liberation of isolation, they want the positive bliss that comes from having no more pain and suffering. They think that is a positive bliss. They think that's a positive bliss, but it's really not so much a positive bliss, but it's more or less just like nirvana, where we blow out get rid of the negatives. We get rid of all the negatives, and we're just at a neutral stage like that. So it's peaceful, like going in this, like living in the cul-de-sac. If you've got any people with little kids, they don't want to live on a main road. When I was a kid, we lived in a place where there was a main road in front of us, and it was very convenient to get anywhere. You could go out and get on a bus or get in your car, and you could go easily to another place. But also there was that traffic, and people would, dogs and people, kids, and would get hit by cars, because there's lots of cars. Whereas you'll find people who have little kids, or if they have animals, they want to be on a cul-de-sac because they want to. So there are people like that. There are people who want peace. They just want the peace. They want the material world to stop, and that's it. And that's their idea. So it is selfish. It is selfish because they don't want the positive bliss of serving or being in an actual active relationship. You find also people, they want to live out in the country, like this shack back here. They want to live in a little grass shack, on Waikiki Beach. Wouldn't be alone, but anyway, if you live in a little grass shack in Hawaii somewhere and out in the country like that, and there's no neighbors around, nothing to disturb you, because you were disturbed by people or by birth, death, disease, and old age in this world. So now you want to get rid of that disturbance, but you don't. If you have bad neighbors, you want to get rid of it and have no neighbors. But the ultimate would be to have good neighbors, to have nice neighbors. And the best neighbor is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sriman Narayana, to serve him, to have an active relationship with that personality. That will be the best, like that. So there are these three grades. And for Vaishnavas, for Vaishnavas, Kaivalya Mukti or Kaivalya liberation is almost, it's considered like spiritual suicide, so in a sense, it's very selfish. It is selfish because imagine, okay, so I'll give you the other example. We are like the property of the Lord. It says in the scriptures here, right? That we are like the Lord's property. So imagine I have a piece of property. I have a cell phone, or I have I have something that belongs to me. It's useful to me. And I lose it. I've lost it, right? That cell phone thinks to itself, I am better off by myself, right? I'm better off with serving somebody else, right? So we're here in this material world where we think we could serve society, or we serve our family, or we serve the demigods, or we serve the great human beings here, the president or the king in our society. That's not correct. We should be serving our rightful owner, Sriman Narayana, like that. So the cell phone belongs to the Sriman Narayana, or the property belongs to Sriman Narayana. Its proper use is for Sriman Narayana. So its wrong use is for other persons. Its wrong use is for other persons. If that property is left by itself, if that property is lost and nobody finds it, if you have property which is lost and it's found by somebody, but not the right owner and used for that purpose, for somebody else's purpose, that's bad. But if the property is completely wasted and not used for any purpose, for any person's purpose, that may be considered even worse, right? Is it worse that you lost your cell phone and somebody else found it and uses it? Or is it worse if you lost your cell phone and it's just lost? It's completely gone. Nobody found it. Which is worse? So we can make arguments either way. When we're here in this material world, we can go round and round, and the possibility is to stay forever going around in the cycle of samsara. But eventually, the possibility is that we'll attain moksha and active service to the Supreme Person in Vaikuntha. Whereas, if we go for Kaivalya, if we go for Kaivalya moksha, there seems to be no way out. It's a dead end. It's like spiritual suicide. So that we can consider that to be worse, in a way. It's a very interesting topic, and I really would like to go more into the idea, the understanding of why is Kaivalya moksha considered, on one hand, is considered to be a spiritual attainment, self-realization, and there's some sort of bliss there. At the same time, it's considered to be very bad, like spiritual suicide by the Vaishnavas, by the personalists. So it's a very interesting topic. I wish we could go into it more, and I wish that there was some more. We could find some more texts which speak about it, and that would be nice. But I don't know. I think it's further discussion about Kaivalya moksha is really beyond me. There's a book. Patricia Mummy, she wrote an article about, there's an anthology of hers, which has got articles by different scholars about what Jivan Mukti, what's the concept of Jivan Mukti in different forms of Vaishnavism and also other religions like that. And that's a nice book that I have. So maybe we could look at that sometime, and we could understand the differences of people's opinions on this, on Jivan Mukti. Of course, what we're talking about is Videha Mukti, or actual moksha beyond our life. But there's also this idea of mukti within, or moksha within life, Jivan Mukti, which is something which is a concept which is accepted in other forms of Vaishnavism and other religions, but not necessarily in Sri Vaishnavism.
It's interesting the point that you made about obviously there's a difference between the two schools, the two kalais, with respect to
Kaivalya.
the dead end of the Kaivalya Mukti, isn't it? That one believes that you can come back from it, or you do come back from it, and one, I think we, as the southern school, believe
the Tengalais believe that that's an eternal position. It can be an eternal position. See, it's mentioned in scriptures as a type of moksha. So in the Vedanta Sutra, the very last sutras in the Vedanta Sutra is no return, no return. No return from moksha is what is meant. There is no return from moksha. So if kaivalya is a form of moksha, that means, according to the scripture, it should be no return, no return.
Exactly.
If however there is a return, as the northern school of the Wadagalais say, if there's a return from kaivalya, then it is not moksha. It's not a type of moksha. Then we have to negate all the statements in the Upanishads, all the statements in the Puranas, all the statements that we have in the scriptures that say that kaivalya is a type of moksha, have to be negated.
Right.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. And the other point that you made, that that the Lord pervades the soul also, which I totally agree with. If he pervades everything, he's all pervasive, he has to also pervade the soul. But I know that the Northern school says that from Bhagavad Gita, the soul cannot be cut, it cannot be dissected, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, I think the belief is that nothing can enter the jiva. But how can God not enter? He is within everything as well as outside of everything. But the nice point of what you're making about the Kaivalya muktas, they also, yes, they're in touch with the Brahmanandam, but ultimately the Brahmanandam is also the Lord. The Lord is present there with the soul, or in the soul.
I mean, somebody's got this concept that kaivalya means, the word kaivalya means isolation. Okay, but there really cannot be isolation. There's no such thing as isolation.
That's another thought. That's another thing I was thinking about, because everything is within the Supreme Lord.
Right.
So even if
he's within everything.
Within
he pervades everything. He's within everything. He pervades everything from the inside and from the outside.
Yeah. So therefore, no matter they're isolated wherever, but they're isolated within God. They're isolated within the Supreme Lord. So it's hard. It's hard to.
Yeah, isolation is really
that.
just a state of mind. Isolation is a state of mind. So the Kaivalya Arti has this isolationist mentality. He has an isolationist mentality. That's all. He's not really isolated. He just has the isolated mentality. If I close my eyes and block my ears, block all my senses, I can believe that the world doesn't exist. That's what a Kaivalyati does. He doesn't want to accept that anything exists outside of him. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just his state of mind.